Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Now we are also available on Telegram, so join our Telegram channel by clicking on the link that is available in the description below to get the latest updates from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 29th June 2021. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start the discussion. Now this article on page number 6 is related to one of the most discussed and debated laws in the Indian Penal Code, and this law is known as the law of sedition. Now this law of sedition has been criticized for curbing the dissent against the government and also has been seen as a severe restriction on the freedom of speech and expression that has been provided in the Indian Constitution. And as such, this article makes a case for this law of sedition to be declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in the near future. Now, recently we note that the Supreme Court of India had acquitted the journalist Vinod Dua from the sedition cases that were filed against him. And in this Vinod Dua case, the Supreme Court had reaffirmed the law of sedition, which was laid down in the Kedarnath Singh case of 1962, and had directed the government to adhere to the guidelines that were provided by the Supreme Court in the famous Kedarnath case of 1962. Now, in the Kedarnath judgment, the Supreme Court had upheld the constitutional validity of the sedition. And in this judgment of Kedarnath, while upholding the constitutional validity of the law of sedition, the Supreme Court had provided certain restrictions. And in this regard, the Supreme Court had laid down that only such writings or speeches which incite people to violence against the government will come within the ambit of sedition law. And as such, it had clearly defined the limits of the law of sedition here. So according to the Kedarnath judgment, unless any speech or writing tends to cause violence or disorder, there is no case of sedition in such a case. In this regard, let us try and understand what are the reasonable restrictions that have been provided in the Constitution of India in the Article 19 regarding the freedom of speech and expression. After that, we will learn as to what amounts to sedition and what exactly is meant by the term sedition that has been defined in the IPC section 124A. Finally, we will look at what are the guidelines of the Supreme Court in the Kedarnath case that have been provided. Also, we will look at what were the issues with the Supreme Court's interpretation in the Kedarnath judgment and how it stood against the intentions of the constitutional makers of India. And finally, let us look at the observations of Law Commission on the law of sedition under the section 124A of the IPC. Now, we all know that the freedom of speech and expression has been provided as a fundamental right in the Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. And the right to freedom of speech and expression has been guaranteed under the Article 19(1). However, this guarantee of freedom of speech and expression has been subject to reasonable restrictions under the Article 19(2). And some of the grounds regarding these reasonable restrictions have been provided in the Constitution itself. And some of these grounds include in the interest of sovereignty and integrity. That is, any event of speech and expression, if it affects the interests of sovereignty and integrity of India, that kind of speech and expression will not be allowed. That is, there is reasonable limitation on such kind of speech and expression. Similarly, the speech and expression can be restricted in case the security of the state is threatened. Friendly relations with foreign states are also threatened. Also, there is issue of public order, decency and morality. And finally, such freedom of speech and expression can be curbed in relation to the contempt of the court, defamation or incite to an offense. So these are the reasonable restrictions that have been provided in the Constitution itself. Now, the constitutional validity of the sedition law was upheld by the Supreme Court based on the reasonable restrictions that have been provided in the Article 19(2) in the fundamental rights related to speech and expression. And that is why let us first try and learn what exactly is meant by this term sedition, and after that we will look at the guidelines that were provided by the Supreme Court in the Kedarnath judgment. So what exactly amounts to sedition? So sedition as defined in the Indian Penal Code under the section 124A reads that whoever by words, either spoken or written, or by signs or by visible representation or otherwise, brings or attempts to bring down into hatred or contempt or attempts to excite disaffection towards the government established by law shall be punished with imprisonment for life to which fine may be added, or with imprisonment which may extend up to 3 years, to which fine may be added, or with fine. So simply it categorizes 4 sources of seditious acts. These include spoken words, written words, signs, or visible representations. So the scope or the sources through which sedition can happen have been defined in this particular law. Also, the offenses have also been defined. These include bringing or attempting to bring the government into contempt or hatred, or exciting or attempting to excite disaffection towards the government. Further, the law also provides 3 explanations that are attached to this particular law. Let us look at these explanations. Now, the first explanation reads that the disaffection includes disloyalty and all the feelings of enmity. Second and third explanations say that one can comment on the measures of the government or other actions of the government without bringing or attempting to bring it into contempt or hatred, or exciting or attempting to excite disaffection towards the government. Now, reasonable criticism has been allowed in the sedition law itself in the explanations that are attached to this particular section. And in this, it has been provided that any comment on the measures of the government will not amount to sedition unless such a criticism attempts to bring the government into contempt or hatred, or it incites disaffection towards the government. So clearly, these explanations provide that any kind of comment will not be included in the provisions of sedition. And as such, a citizen is free to criticize any measure or action of the government. However, such criticism should not attempt to bring the government into contempt or hatred, or excite or attempt to excite disaffection towards the government. So reasonable criticism has also been provided in the sedition law itself. In this regard, let us look at what are the guidelines that have been provided in the Kedarnath judgment. Now, the issue here is that the governments of the day have been using or misusing the sedition law to curb any kind of dissent against the government. And as such kind of misuse of sedition law was challenged in the Supreme Court of India back in 1962. And that particular judgment has again been upheld in the Vinod Dua case in the 2021. So in the landmark judgment of 1962 in the Kedarnath Singh case, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutional validity of the sedition law, and it attempted to restrict its scope for misuse. So as we note that the governments have been misusing the sedition law, the Supreme Court in this particular judgment tried to restrict its scope for misuse. Now the court held that unless accompanied by an incitement or call for violence, the criticism of the government cannot be labeled as sedition. So only those kinds of criticisms that call for violence will be considered as sedition according to this interpretation of the Supreme Court in the Kedarnath case. And in this particular judgment, the Supreme Court had laid down 7 principles in the Kedarnath Singh judgment that specify the situations in which the charge of sedition cannot be applied. However, even after detailed guidelines that have been provided by the Supreme Court, the governments have been misusing this sedition law. And how this law has been misused? So in the instances of criticism or dissent against the government, what the governments do is that they file a sedition charge against that person. And the conviction rate in the sedition cases is only 3%. That is, even when the charges are filed against 100 people, only 3 people will be convicted out of these 100 people. So basically, the governments book the people under the sedition law, normally in order to curb the dissent or criticism of the government's policies and actions. And as the offense under the sedition law is non-bailable in nature, the process of fighting the case itself becomes a kind of harassment for the person who is indulging in the criticism of the government policies or is indulging in the dissent against the government. So in this regard, let us look at these 7 principles that have been laid down by the Supreme Court in the Kedarnath Singh judgment. Now, the first principle that has been laid out by the Supreme Court is regarding the expression "the government established by the law." In this line, the Supreme Court has clarified that the expression "government established by the law" has to be distinguished from the persons for the time being engaged in carrying on the administration. And as such, the expression "government established by the law" needs to be distinguished from the persons who are holding the positions under the government. And as such, the Supreme Court has said that the government established by law is the visible symbol of the state. And the very existence of the state will be in jeopardy if the government established by the law is subverted. So if any person gets into the criticism of the person who is holding the position in the government, that will not amount to sedition. However, if the criticism is directed against the government of India and not particularly towards the person who is holding the position in the government, that kind of criticism will be included in the sedition. So clearly, the Supreme Court has distinguished between the term the government established by the law and the people who are holding the positions under the government. Further, the Supreme Court has said that any acts within the meaning of Section 124A which have the effect of subverting the government by bringing the government into contempt or hatred or creating disaffection against it would be within the penal statute, because the feeling of disloyalty to the government established by the law or enmity to it imports the idea of tendency to public order or public disorder by the use of actual violence or incitement to violence. Now, clearly, such kind of effects of subverting the governments are sometimes seen in the case of Naxalism. And the main ideology of the Naxal group is that they want to overthrow the Indian state or the Indian government. And as such kind of incitements to disloyalty to the government will be considered as sedition, because they want to subvert the government of India itself and establish their own law. And that is why such kind of things can be included under the sedition. So clearly, if there is any attempt that brings the government into contempt or hatred or creates disaffection against it, would be included as disloyalty to the government established by the law. And this is because such kind of acts have the tendency to public disorder by the use of actual violence or incitement to violence. So clearly, the Supreme Court has interpreted the term contempt or hatred or creating disaffection against the government. Further, it has been highlighted that the comments, however strongly worded, which express the disapprobation of actions of the government without exciting those feelings which generate the inclination to cause public disorder by the acts of violence, would not be penal. That is, any kind of criticism, even if it is a very strongly worded criticism and it does not have the tendency of causing public disorder or inciting violence, would not be considered as sedition, and that is why there is no penal action required in such cases. Also, a citizen has a right to say or write whatever he likes about the government or its measures by the way of criticism or comment, so long as he does not incite the people to violence against the government established by the law or with the intention of creating public disorder. So clearly, the criticism or dissent against the government has not been included under the sedition according to the judgment of Supreme Court in the Kedarnath case of 1962. Further, the provisions of the sections read as a whole along with the explanations make it reasonably clear that the sections aim at rendering penal only such activities as would be intended or have a tendency to create disorder or disturbance of public peace by the resort to violence. So again, the Supreme Court has reiterated that all such acts that have an intention or tendency of creating disorder and disturbance to public peace by the resorting to violence will be considered under the sedition. Also, the Supreme Court has highlighted that this law of sedition should be invoked only when the words written or spoken have the tendency or intention of creating public disorder or the disturbance of law and order. So only in such cases this kind of sedition law should be invoked and FIR should be filed. And without such kind of clearly held intention of creating public disorder or disturbance of law and order, such kind of cases should not be included under the ambit of sedition law. In this regard, the court had proposed to limit the operation of sedition law only to such activities as come within the ambit of observations of the federal court, and those activities involving incitement to violence or intention or tendency to create public disorder or cause disturbance of public peace. So in short, the Supreme Court had provided clear limitations on the misuse of the sedition law by the government. However, even after such kind of limitations that have been imposed by the Supreme Court through these guidelines, the governments have misused the provisions of sedition law in order to curb dissent and criticism against the government. So in this regard, it has been highlighted that the issue is not that Supreme Court has defined the limits to the sedition law. The issue is that the very existence of the law has provided excuse to the governments of the day for curbing any sort of criticism or dissent, even when it is not inciting the violence against the government. Further, sedition as defined in the section 124A of the IPC clearly violates the article 19(1)A of Constitution, which confers the fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression, which is the most valuable right of free citizens of a free country. In this regard, the author has highlighted issues with the Supreme Court's interpretation of the sedition law in the Kedarnath judgment and has argued that the court should have declared the sedition law as unconstitutional back then. Now, regarding the Supreme Court's interpretation, it has been highlighted that the section 124A does not get protection under the Article 19(2) on the grounds of reasonable restrictions. And why is it so? This is because sedition as a reasonable restriction, though it was included in the draft Article 19 during the draft Constitution, it was deleted when the article was finally adopted by the Constituent Assembly. And this itself is a clear justification that the constitutional makers or the founding fathers of the Indian Constitution did not want sedition to be a part of the Article 19 in the form of reasonable restrictions. So clearly it shows that the constitution makers did not consider sedition as a reasonable restriction, and that is why the Supreme Court's interpretation and upholding it as constitutional does not stand the scrutiny. And despite such clear intentions that were provided in the Constituent Assembly debates, the Supreme Court interpreted the words "in the interest of public order" used in the section 19(2) and held that the offence of sedition arises when the seditious utterances can lead to disorder or violence. Now, Supreme Court, while upholding the constitutional validity of the sedition law, has used the argument or interpreted the words "in the interest of public order" as provided in the reasonable restrictions in the Article 19(2). However, clearly the constitutional makers did not want sedition to be included as a reasonable restriction. And that is why the Supreme Court's upholding of the constitutional validity of the sedition law goes against the intentions of the constitutional makers of India. And as such, the author says that this act of reading down the section 124A brought it clearly under the Article 19(2), which was clearly not the intention of the constitutional makers, and saved the law of sedition and held it constitutional. Otherwise, the sedition law would have been clearly struck down as unconstitutional even in 1962. And as such, it continues to remain on the statute book, and citizens continue to go to jail not because their writings led to any kind of disorder, but because they made critical comments against the authorities. In this regard, the recommendations of the Law Commission of India on the sedition law are very important. So let us go through those recommendations of the Law Commission of India regarding the sedition law. Now, after this, let us look at the Law Commission's observation on this sedition law. So it has observed that dissent and criticism of the government are essential ingredients of a vibrant democracy. And further, right to criticize one's own history has been protected under the freedom of speech and expression under Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. Further, the Law Commission has highlighted the misuse of the sedition law against the freedom of expression. And it has observed that although it is essential to protect national integrity, the sedition law should not be misused to curb the freedom of speech and expression. Now further, this law was introduced during the British times, and as such it is a colonial law. So in this background, the Law Commission has questioned the colonial provision of sedition in India, and that too when the British government has already abolished the sedition law in their own country. So continuation of a colonial law which has been removed in the Britain itself does not stand the test of the times. And finally, the Law Commission has observed that for merely expressing a thought which is not in consonance or agreement with the policy of the government of the day, a person should not be charged under the provision of the sedition. So these are the suggestions which can be reused in writing answers related to the sedition law. And this is mainly because it is an observation of the Law Commission which is created by the government itself. And it has warned and cautioned against the misuse of sedition law by the governments. So in short, there is a need to differentiate between strong criticism of the government and incitement to violence or threatening the security of the state. And that is why sedition law should not be misused by the governments of the day, and especially for curbing the freedom of speech and expression of the public at large. And finally, as discussed in the DNS of 1st June 2021 by Webber sir, let us look at some of the arguments against and in favor of the sedition law. So the first argument against the sedition law is that it stands against democratic norms. This is because such kind of law does not exist in any kind of democracy. And clearly, in case of India, it is a colonial hangover because this law has been taken from the colonial governments that used to curb the dissent of the freedom fighters of India against the British colonial government. Second criticism against the sedition law is that there is inadequate capacity of the state machinery, and that is because the cases go on for a very long time, and as the cases keep on lingering for a long period of time, the process itself becomes harassment for the person who is accused of sedition. And clearly, we have seen that only 3% people are convicted under the sedition law, and this has been highlighted by the National Crime Records Bureau. And since only 3% people are convicted, this is clearly a gross misuse of the provisions of the sedition law. Also, this is draconian in nature because it is non bailable in nature, and also it provides for life imprisonment. And as such, it is used to gag the freedom of speech and expression that has been provided to the citizens of India, including the press in India. However, there are some arguments in favor of the existence of the sedition law in the Indian statute book. First is that it is not really a draconian law because it has been upheld by the Supreme Court in the judgment of Kedarnath. Secondly, its application is a part of reasonable restriction as has been interpreted by the Supreme Court in the judgment. Further, it does not really curb the free speech and expression because ultimately the case will go to the courts and they will set the people free if there has been any kind of misuse. Although the process itself is a very harassing process. Again, there are anti-national elements that exist in India. For example, Naxalites, the terrorists, etc., who seek the overthrow of the Indian state. And that is why such anti-national elements or such anti-national activities call for the existence of a sedition law in India. And as such, it has been highlighted that mere misuse cannot be the ground for repealing of such acts. And as such, the Supreme Court itself had called for again checking the constitutional validity of the sedition law. So let's wait for the judgment of the Supreme Court and what it tells us about the constitutional validity of the sedition law. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 1 is related to the stimulus package that has been announced by the Government of India amounting to rupees 6.28 lakh crores because of the second wave of pandemic that hit India recently and that has also adversely impacted the Indian economic scenario. Now, the Indian economic growth has been impacted adversely because of both demand as well as supply side issues. And as such, the kind of issues that Indian economy is witnessing is sometimes termed as a twin shock that the Indian economy is facing because of lack of demand as well as lack of supply. And that is why this is a twin shock that Indian economy is facing right now. Now, according to a recent report released by the National Statistical Office, the Indian economy has suffered worst form of economic recession for the first time in 41 years since 1979 and 1980. And that is why it presents a grave situation for Indian economy, and this will impact the demographic dividend that India has if the economic growth does not come back on track. Now, before looking at the measures that have been announced, which are around 17 announcements, let us first look at what exactly was the rationale for announcing such a package. And this was because there were a lot of issues in the Indian economy and that needed to be corrected. And as such, the government of India has come out with this 6.28 lakh crore stimulus package to boost economic growth. So let us first look at the rationale for the package. And we note that the government of India had announced a package of rupees 20 lakh crore by the name Atmanirbhar Bharat package last year as well. So this is in continuation or in addition to the stimulus package that was announced by the government of India under the Atmanirbhar Bharat package last year. Now, regarding the rationale for the announcement of such a package, it is not just to boost the economic growth, but it is also to solve some of the issues that the Indian economy is facing, which are likely to increase the economic growth in the near future. First is that it wants or it aims at preventing the vicious economic cycle that the Indian economy is facing. Now, there are four drivers of an economy. These include consumption expenditure, investment, government expenditure, and net exports, that is, exports minus the imports. Now, in India's case, it is known that the consumption expenditure is the most important driver of Indian economy, and this accounts for about 60% of India's GDP. However, the pandemic has deeply impacted the Indian economy, and this has led to loss of jobs in India. And because of the loss of jobs and the accompanied economic slowdown, the consumption expenditure has come down drastically. And because of the fall in consumption expenditure, there are fears that it will further decrease the economic growth and boost economic slowdown in the Indian economy, which will be detrimental for India's future. So, mainly the rationale for announcing this package was to boost consumption expenditure in the first place. The second important motive of announcing this package was to boost consumer sentiment. And according to Reserve Bank of India's monthly consumption expenditure survey, the consumer sentiment within India has been on a constant decline. And if the consumers are optimistic about the current and future economic state of the country, then they would spend more money, which will lead to an increase in the GDP. However, if the consumer confidence is low, this can further lead to decrease in the consumption expenditure, as we have already seen, and as such, it is likely to adversely impact the Indian GDP. And that is why the announcement of this package was required in order to boost the consumer sentiment, which has been deeply impacted because of the pandemic. Further, this package is a follow-up to the previous packages that were announced by the Government of India to boost economic growth. And we note that under the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, the Government of India had announced a stimulus package worth rupees 20 lakh crores. Now, since during pandemic, the healthcare infrastructure was severely strained, and as such, the Government of India wants to boost healthcare infrastructure. And since the pandemic is once in a century crisis, it has clearly exposed the loopholes in our healthcare infrastructure. And according to the Economic Survey of 2021, we need to substantially ramp up our investment in the healthcare. And we note that the healthcare and education are two important pillars of human resource development. And as such, the Government of India has now started focus on boosting healthcare infrastructure. And last but not the least, the focus of the Government of India is on improving credit creation in the Indian economy. Now, we already know that the Reserve Bank of India has taken various initiatives to improve the credit creation in the Indian economy, and the RBI in this line has announced various measures to improve the liquidity situation. However, despite such surplus liquidity, the banks presently are reluctant to lend loans due to fear of rising non-performing assets due to the economic slowdown. And because of the poor investment sentiment, the businesses are also reluctant to take loans. So, despite having a large amount of liquidity which has been provided by the Reserve Bank of India, the credit creation is not happening in the Indian economy. So, in this line, there is a need to nudge the banks to lend the loans to private sector. And at the same time, the private sector also needs to be encouraged to take the loans. And this improvement in credit creation would have multifaceted benefits in the form of increased investment, job creation, revival of demand, and if the consumer expenditure and credit creation improves in the near future, it will turn this vicious economic cycle into a virtuous one. That is, it will lead to increased consumption expenditure, it will lead to increased private investment, and already the government is spending a lot of amount, and as such the government expenditure is already high. And if the overall economic growth is good, it will also improve the Indian exports. So clearly, the rationale is very well defined for the announcement of this package. In this line, the finance minister has announced around 17 measures. And these measures can be clubbed into three broad categories. First is economic relief from the pandemic. Second is strengthening the public health infrastructure. And third is giving or providing impetus to growth and employment. Now, some of these measures, for example, the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, has been covered in the DNS of 27th May 2021. The additional subsidy for DAP and other fertilizers has been discussed in the DNS of 20th May, Also, financial assistance that has been provided to discoms has been covered in the budget video of 2021 and 22. So you do go through these videos to understand these particular aspects that have been again announced during this package. However, we will look at the new announcements that have been made by the Government of India under this economic relief package. Now, in order to provide economic relief from the pandemic, the Government of India has announced the loan guarantee scheme for pandemic affected sectors. And under this scheme, the Government of India has promised the guarantee on loan repayment that have been taken by various sectors which have been affected by the pandemic adversely. And the guarantee on the loan repayment would be provided by the National Credit Guarantee Trust Company Limited. And the sectors which would be able to avail loans under this scheme would include healthcare sector for both creation as well as expansion of healthcare infrastructure, guarantee on loans that have been extended by the banks to microfinance institutions or the MFIs, for on lending to small borrowers up to loan size of rupees 1.25 lakh, and guarantee has been provided on loans that have been extended to people who are working in the tourism sector. So all these sectors have been provided loan guarantee by the Government of India. Second announcement is related to Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme or the ECLGS scheme that has been announced. Now in May 2020, under the Atmanirbhar Bharat 1.0, the government had announced this particular scheme. The objective of this scheme was to mitigate the economic distress that is being faced by the micro, small and medium enterprises. And it aimed at providing these sectors with additional funding in the form of fully guaranteed emergency credit line. What were the likely benefits that the Government of India expected? The Government of India expected that the banks and the non-banking finance companies will extend collateral-free loans worth rupees 3 lakh crores to the MSMEs, business enterprises, individual loans for business purposes and mudra borrowers. And the eligibility was that it was applicable to only standard loans. These included the MSMEs who have not defaulted on their repayment of loans and their accounts were categorized as standard assets by the banks. That is, it did not provide or make eligible those enterprises that were considered as substandard assets or non-performing assets by the Government of India. And only those banks which were firm on repayment of the loans were provided relief under this measure. The features were that there was moratorium of 12 months on the principal repayment and the interest rates were also capped. What was the government's role here? The government's role was 100% credit guarantee cover to banks and the NBFCs on principal and interest amount. And this guarantee was again provided by the National Credit Guarantee Trust Company Limited. In this line, the latest announcement is that in the initial or the first Atmanirbhar Bharat package, the collateral-free loans were announced worth rupees 3 lakh crores. However, in the latest, this has been raised from 3 lakh crores to 4.5 lakh crores. So basically, it is just an improvement over the first announcement that was made during the first Atmanirbhar Bharat package, which amounted to rupees 20 lakh crores. Now, the next important announcement is related to the extension of Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. And the Finance Minister has announced the extension of Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana from 30th June 2021 to 31st March 2022. Now, background is that in October 2020, the Union Cabinet had given its approval to the Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana in order to boost employment creation in the formal sector. And under this scheme, the government would bear the burden of Employees Provident Fund contribution of both the employees as well as the employers. And that is why let us learn as to what is meant by the Employee Provident Fund. So Employee Provident Fund is nothing but a social security scheme that is aimed at salaried individuals and is run by the Employees Provident Fund Office. And this comes under the Labour Ministry. So this is one important fact. And regarding the coverage, all those organizations that employ 20 people or more need to offer Employees Provident Fund benefits to their employees. Now, is it compulsory or not? So the EPF is not compulsory for all the employees, but only those who earn up to rupees 15,000 a month have to contribute 12% of their basic salary plus the dearness allowance to the EPF. And the employer then contributes an equal percentage, 12%, to the corpus, out of which 3.67% goes to the EPF and the rest 8.33 goes towards employees' pension schemes. And for those who earn above threshold of rupees 15,000, the contribution to the EPF is optional. So it is only compulsory for those who earn up to rupees 15,000. So in this case, the government of India will now contribute both the employees as well as the employer's contribution. So under this scheme, the central government would pay both the employers and the employees' share of contribution, which is about total 24% of the wages for establishment strength up to 1000 employees. And only it will pay employees' share of 12% of the wages in case the establishment has strength of more than 1000 employees. Now, this was announced in the Atmanirbhar Bharat package last year. However, this has now been extended from 30th June 2021 to 31st March 2022. So these were the economic relief package that were announced by the Government of India for improving the credit creation sentiment and consumer expenditure sentiment. However, regarding strengthening of public health infrastructure, the Government of India has announced these schemes. So a new scheme has been announced to focus on short-term emergency preparedness with special emphasis on children and pediatric care. These include availability of ICUs, oxygen supply at central, district and sub-district level, availability of equipment, medicines, access to teleconsultation, strengthening ambulance services. Now the analysis of this stimulus package will come in the newspapers in the coming days, and accordingly the analysis, that is both the positives as well as the criticisms of these initiatives, will be covered in the subsequent DNS videos. Then the next important aspect of this stimulus package is impetus for growth and employment. In this regard, first announcement is fighting malnutrition and improving the farmers' income. So the earlier focus of research was on developing higher yield crop varieties, and attention towards nutrition, climate resilience and improving the income levels of farmers was missing. An announcement is that the ICAR has developed a biofortified crop varieties which are high nutrient like protein, iron, zinc, vitamin A, etc. And varieties tolerant to diseases, insects, pests, drought, salinity and flooding have been developed, and accordingly 21 such varieties will be released now. To improve the export situation, export insurance cover has been announced. Background is that India's vision of becoming $5 trillion economy by 2024 is very well linked with the export-oriented approach. We note that Indian exports are not that effective presently, and accordingly, in order to provide boost to greater integration with the global value chains, it will enable India to attract investment, create jobs, boost exports, and hence sustain the virtuous economic cycle. Now, the Export Credit Guarantee Corporation promotes exports by providing credit insurance services, and it supports around 30% of India's merchandise exports. And it has been decided to infuse equity in the Export Credit Guarantee Corporation over 5 years to boost export insurance cover by rupees 88,000 crores. So basically, Government of India is increasing the funding options for the Export Credit Guarantee Corporation, which in itself supports 30% of India's merchandise exports by providing credit insurance services. Further, the government has announced streamlining of process of public-private partnership projects and asset monetization. In the Union Budget of 2021 and 22, the government has announced the National Monetization Pipeline to monetize the assets owned by the PSUs, for example, the national highways, airports, gas pipelines, etc. And it was believed that the money earned through monetization of assets can be in turn used for creation of new infrastructure assets. However, the current process of approval of PPP projects is long and it involves multiple levels of approval. So what is the new announcement? A new policy will now be formulated for appraisal and approval of PPP proposals and monetization of core infrastructure assets like national highways, airports, gas pipelines, etc. And the new policy would focus on speedy clearance of projects and to improve the ease of doing business. And last but not the least, a push has been given to Digital India, which was already announced by the government earlier. The BharatNet project of Government of India has the underlying objective of providing high-speed broadband to all the panchayats in the country. And it is the revamped version of National Optical Fiber Network, which was launched back in 2011. The progress on this front so far is that on August 15, 2020, the PM had announced broadband connectivity to all the inhabited villages in 1000 days. And out of the 2.5 lakh gram panchayats, 1.56 lakh gram panchayats have been made service ready by 31st May 2021. So the new announcement is that the government has proposed to implement the BharatNet in PPP model in 16 states. Now, in the coming days, articles will be published in the newspaper related to the analysis of the stimulus package that has been announced by the Government of India. And these articles will cover various aspects as to how effective these announcements by the Government of India will be in improving the economic scenario in India. So, all these aspects will be discussed as and when the articles appear in the newspapers in the subsequent DNS videos. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 7 is related to Central Armed Police Forces, which are significantly important for India's internal security situation. And as such, the discussion that we will have now will be important for us from General Studies Paper 3 point of view under the topic security. In this line, the article highlights that in the recent times when personnel of Central Armed Police Forces have suffered reverses, there has been an immediate hue and cry, particularly from the army veterans. And also, army officials have been appointed as advisors for anti-Maoist operations in Home Ministry. However, the army officials come under the Defense Ministry and they have negligible knowledge about the counter-insurgency operations. In this regard, let us try and understand the number of Central Armed Police Forces that exist in India, what are their functions, and also what are various issues faced by these Central Armed Police Forces. And after that, we will look at some of the suggestions to improve the situation. Now, the discussion that we will have is a very important topic for us from exam point of view, and this can be asked in your mains examination in the security. So, do prepare it well. Now, as far as Central Armed Police Forces are concerned, they function under the Ministry of Home Affairs, and this is the foremost and important thing about the Central Armed Police Forces. Now, they are 7 in number. These include the Assam Rifles, Border Security Force, Central Industrial Security Force, Central Reserve Police Force or the CRPF, ITBP, that is Indo-Tibetan Border Police, National Security Guard, and Seema Suraksha Bal. Now, out of these organizations, the Assam Rifles has operational control under the Ministry of Defense. And out of all these Central Armed Police Forces, the Assam Rifles, the BSF, ITBP and the SSB are border guarding forces, and they are present on various international borders. For example, BSF deals with the security situation on Indo-Pakistan border. Then the NSG or the National Security Guards is a commando trained force organization in India, and they are used for special operations. The CISF or the Central Industrial Security Force provides security and protection to the industrial undertakings and vital installations, while the CRPF or the Central Reserve Police Force is deployed in aid of civil power in matters relating to maintenance of law and order, internal security and counter-insurgency. You might be knowing that CRPF officials are deployed in the Naxal affected areas and also other issues or other areas where internal security is at stake. Now, important thing to note is that the Central Armed Police Forces are headed by DGP rank officers. In this regard, there are some functional issues in the functioning of Central Armed Police Forces, and let us try and understand these issues, which can be very important for us from mains examination perspective. First and foremost issue related to the functioning of the Central Armed Police Forces is the working conditions. Now, even when the role of the Central Armed Police Forces is vital for India's internal security, the working conditions are very bad as compared to the army. And in this line, the Standing Committee on Home Affairs in the year 2017 had expressed concern over the working conditions of the personnel of the border guarding forces. And this committee had observed that the Central Armed Police Forces personnel have to work for about 16 to 18 hours a day with very little time for rest or sleep. And the personnel were also not satisfied with the medical facilities that have been provided to them at the border locations. Then the personnel of the Central Armed Police Forces have not been treated at par with the armed forces in terms of pay and allowances. So these are some of the issues related to working conditions which have been flagged by the Standing Committee of Home Ministry. Second important functional issue with the Central Armed Police Forces is the cadre management issue. Now, each of the 7 has its own cadre of officers. However, they are headed by officers of Indian Police Services. And as such, the cadre of officers do not see themselves as heading the organization in the progression of their careers. And there is stagnation in the promotions and lack of cadre review also, which impacts the morale of the cadre officers. Further, these central armed police forces are burdened by the responsibilities of the state governments. And this is because there is heavy dependence of the states on central armed police forces even for everyday law and order issues. So in case any riot affected area is there, the central armed police forces are called. And this affects the anti-insurgency and the border guarding operations, which is the primary role of the CAPFs besides curtailing the training needs of these forces. Then there are operational bottlenecks as well in the functioning of these central armed police forces. And all the CAPFs have set up training institutions to meet their training requirements and impart professional skills on specialized topics. However, there is an urgent need to upgrade the curriculum and infrastructure in these training institutes, which is lacking right now. So these are some of the issues in the functioning of the central armed police forces. Now, as we have seen the issues, let us look at what could be the possible solutions. In this regard, there is a need for modernizing of the central armed police forces. And the Ministry of Home Affairs should ensure that the bottlenecks in the procurement should be identified and corrective actions are taken. The government should also engage in negotiations with the ordnance factories and manufacturers in public and private sector to ensure an uninterrupted supply of equipment and other infrastructure. Also, while purchasing the latest equipment, training needs should also be taken care of if required, and it should be included in the purchase agreement itself. Finally, given the evolution of hybrid nature of warfare, the contents of the training should also have a mix of conventional matters as well as latest technologies such as information communication technology and cyber security. So all these aspects will be aimed at modernizing of the central armed police forces. Now, as we have already seen that the central armed police forces are burdened with the state responsibilities, and as such there is a need for augmenting the state governments' capacities. And as such, the states must develop their own systems and augment their own police forces by providing adequate training and equipment. Meanwhile, the central government should supplement the efforts of the state governments by providing financial assistance and other help that is needed by the states for capacity building of their forces. Further, there is a need for corrective measures in the cadre policy of the Central Armed Police Forces. In this regard, the Joshi Committee had recommended that the top positions should be filled from the respective cadre of the Central Armed Police Forces, and the Indian Police Services personnel should not head these positions. Also, this committee recommended that the cadre review of all the CAPFs should be carried out within a defined timeline, which is one of the concerns in the functioning of the CAPFs. It is high time to implement these recommendations as soon as possible. And finally, there is a need for personnel reforms. In this line, there is a need for organizing workshops on stress management, and these should be regularly undertaken. Also, there is a need for providing yoga and meditation trainings to the Central Armed Police Forces personnel so that they can handle the severe stress that is there because of long working hours. Further, the provision of accommodation near the deployment of the respective forces in order to enable the personnel to meet their family members should also be explored, which is the case in case of army. So that is how the morale of the Central Armed Police Forces as well as their effectiveness can be improved drastically. With this, let's take up the next news article. Now, in today's newspaper, there are few articles that are important for us from the prelims examination perspective. In this line, the first article is there on page number 4, and it is related to a wildlife sanctuary in Assam. And as such, in the quiz related to this DNS video, which is available on the eLearn platform, you can find a question and the explanation will have the important prelims pointer from this news article perspective. Then the second important news article from the prelims perspective is the Agni P missile, which has been test fired. Again, you will find an MCQ related to this particular aspect. The next article from prelims perspective that is important is the 2021 Fukuoka Grand Prize that has been provided to P. Sainath. And on page number 12, these two articles of Ukraine and the US launching Black Sea drills as well as the US airstrikes that hit Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq are both important for us from the location point of view in the international relations section. So on all these topics, you will find the MCQs on the eLearn platform and you can try the quiz on that particular issue. So on all these issues, you will find MCQs in the form of a quiz on the eLearn platform where the DNS is also uploaded. Do go through that quiz and learn the explanations related to some important aspects from the prelims perspective. With this, we conclude today's discussion, and this is the question for the day.